Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. Last night after sundown, Passover started and it's going to go until the 30th of April. So today would be the first full day of Passover, or otherwise known as Pesach. So it would have been last night that the Passover meal would have been had. It's called the seder. And I got an email from Jessica Homer, subject line, Pentecost 40 days after Eclipse. Now, Pentecost is also a Jewish holiday known as Shavuot in Hebrew, or the Feast of Weeks, also known as Pentecost. So we're going to get into these spring feast days and the spring harvest and stuff like that. So Jessica Homer, hi Jared. You may have shared this already, but if not, literally just before watching your most recent video this morning on the miracle in Israel being on the scale of the splitting of the Red Sea, I heard through an announcement on YouTube that Pentecost 2024 falls 40 days after the April 8th eclipse. May 19th is technically 41 days later, but the start of that day on the Hebrew calendar would possibly be May 18th at sundown, right? You know better than me. Even if it's actually 41 days, I'm still reminded of Jonah and Nineveh, who had their own darkening of the sun followed by a 40-day warning to repent. Pentecost is also 50 days after Easter. The latter happens every year since Pentecost, or Pentecosta, is Greek for 50th. But still, these numbers and their order feel very important. 40 equals time of cleansing. 50 equals the coming of God's Holy Spirit. Especially after watching your video on God's miracles truly being present in Israel now, I don't think these divine numbers, heavenly intervention, or the timing of Elder Bowen's talk are coincidence. Elder Bowen's recent conference talk on the need to believe in miracles came to mind while watching your video. And then she leaves a link for that. We're going to read a little bit from that in a minute. Your own Pentecostal moment in Kirtland was so sweet, and our family will be taking the trip as well. Oh, good. And if you don't know what she's referring to, I basically described the Kirtland eclipse because I was there for the eclipse. It felt like my own personal Pentecostal experience. I didn't see angels or meet with the Savior or anything in person, at least not that I know of. But it was just a very special experience. It was very powerful, very strong. Being there just a month after the church had purchased the Kirtland Temple, and the day after General Conference when President Nelson talked about the Kirtland Temple, and then taking the tour, it was very, very powerful. And then on top of that, the eclipse that day, the day after conference. So yes, but please, Jessica, please do make that trip. It'll be worth it, I promise you. And then she says, thank you for sharing all that you do. Your sister in Zion, Jessica Pittner Homer. Okay, so I had to pull up some stuff because she's saying here that 40 days after the eclipse is Pentecost. Okay, so I had to look at that, and I think what she's referring to is on the Christian calendar, not so much the Hebrew calendar, because there's a difference in how Christians and Jews calculate the same thing. So Easter is the Christian version of first fruits, right? But it's calculated differently. So this is how it goes. Okay, so I went to timeanddate.com, Pentecost 2024 in the United States, and it says that it's on May 19th, 2024. But that's according to the Christian observance of Pentecost. So in here, I also using time and date, I did the count between two dates, the days between two dates. So from Easter until the Christian Pentecost, you have right here 50 days. And that's how it should be because it's a 50-day count. I'll show you what that means in a minute. And then from April 8th, the day of the eclipse, to May 19th, the Christian Pentecost, according to this, it's 42 days. That includes, and this is the way that it's counted on the Hebrew calendar, it counts that first day. So in this case, the eclipse day of April 8th, and then goes until the day of Pentecost, including that. So the count would include that day, May 19th. So 42 days, but it is still pretty interesting. And as we're talking about Nineveh, in case you guys don't know what she's referring to, There's been a lot of attention around the fact that this eclipse that occurred this year, there's a bunch of towns in the United States named Nineveh that are really close to the path of totality. Uh, I went through the trouble of finding every Nineveh in the United States because I wanted to do it for myself. It turns out that you only have two that are actually in the path of totality. The rest of them are relatively close. So I see a lot of like YouTube channels and different posts on social media being like, oh, there's, 7 Ninevehs. There's like 7 towns named Nineveh that the eclipse goes over. And I guess that depends on how you count or how you define go over. For me, it's the path of totality. So there's only 2, but it just depends on you and I guess how you feel about it. Excuse me, how you feel about it. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lord is sending a message through this. A lot of people are recognizing it, but I do want to clarify there's only 2 that are in the path of totality. With the 2017 eclipse, there was the same claim made about Salem's, that there were 7 cities named Salem. And as far as I can tell, that's not true if we're talking about the path of totality. But you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or no, not that one, 5. You have a total of 5. Well, this one, depending on the city limits, this could be 1, 2. So it's like 6 technically. Anyway, I think that that's interesting. Like I've said before, I find much more interesting the fact that within the path of totality of these 2 eclipses, you have our church sites like Adam-on-Diamond, Far West, New Jerusalem in the 2017 eclipse, and then the one that just recently happened, Sacred Grove, Kirtland Temple. These are places that God the Father appeared, and also Jesus Christ, as well as in the case of the Kirtland Temple, Moses, Elias, and Elijah. You have headquarters of the church, Fayette, New York, Hiram, Ohio, for a time, Kirtland. And then over here, we have a future headquarters of the church, New Jerusalem. And then Far West was headquarters of the church for a while. And then you have Adam-on-Diamond, where a city was going to be built and a temple constructed. So I paid more attention to that. But the piece about Nineveh in 40 days, it is interesting. But according to this, it's 42 days. But that doesn't mean that there isn't significance in that. Maybe something will happen 2 days before the Christian Pentecost. Now, on the Hebrew calendar for this year, this is how Pentecost works. So, like I said, Pesach or Passover started yesterday at sundown, and it goes until the 30th. And the way that the Jews do it these days is that it's the second day of Passover or Pesach, that is first fruits. So on that day, tomorrow, that is the day when the first sheaves of the barley harvest would be brought to the temple for sacrifice. And so therefore it's called first fruits. And now we observe it as Easter, although we go according to the Christian calendar, and the Jews keep doing it this way. Although from what I studied, they used to do it the same way I think that Christians do now, and I think that's why there's the difference. I think the Christians preserved the original way of calculating it. I'm not exactly sure. I did a video about it one time, but regardless. So the way that it works is on the 24th, that's going to be first fruits. And that's the first day of the Omer. So it's like an Omer, if I remember right, that's like a unit of measurement for like barley or something like that. So you have the first offering of barley to the temple, and then you count 50 days. Okay. So that's the first day. And then it goes all the way, because what it is it's 7 weeks. And then after the 7 weeks are complete, 49 days, the next day is like the completion. And that's what is Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks. You see how that works? 7 weeks. So it's the Feast of Weeks. So after the 7 weeks are up, you're on the 50th day and the 51st, because it's a 2-day holiday. You have Shavuot 1 and Shavuot 2. And the 49th day of the Omer is the day before. And then the 50th day, which they don't put here as a day of counting, but the 50th day is Shavuot. And Shavuot, or Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks, goes by all those names. It has a lot to do at that point with the wheat harvest. And in my mind, I wouldn't be surprised if something like the burning or some key event that has to do with the second coming takes place during Shavuot, because you remember when Christ said, you'll know that the second coming is soon at hand, because it's like, it's like how you know that summer is nigh. You start to see leaves in flowers and stuff, so you know that summer is nigh. And the Feast of Weeks takes place in late spring and early summer. So I don't know, maybe some significant second coming event will take place on that day or around that time, or one of these 2 days. So I think that it's important to pay attention to these things. The reason why, by the way, because if you haven't really looked into it, there is reason to believe that we should pay attention to these feast days and these Jewish holidays, because it seems like the Lord still does things occasionally on those days, like they fulfill certain things. So, for example, we know originally what they were meant to do is they were meant to point your mind forward. If you're like an Old Testament person, point your mind forward to the coming of Christ and his atonement. So that's pretty clear when we talk about Passover and the Passover seder. The Passover seder has essentially become the sacrament, and we do it every week. But he came, so the sacrifice, the Passover meal, the Paschal lamb, first fruits, that was fulfilled by the resurrection of Christ. He was the first fruits to complete this entire mortal process and then become resurrected. Right. And then on Shavuot, Pentecost, it was during this holiday that the Holy Ghost came to the apostles and to those early Christians. So it's like that was fulfilled by the coming of the Holy Ghost to the church. So I have this spreadsheet that kind of clarifies it. So you have these spring harvests, and if you think of the dispensation of the meridian of time, like Christ's dispensation, if you think of that as the spring harvest, with all these different things being fulfilled, there's also the fall feast days, which correspond with the fall harvest. The first of which is Rosh Hashanah, which is also known as the Feast of Trumpets. And then that starts the 10 days of awe. That leads up to the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And then after that, you have Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as the Feast of Booths. So these are the fall feast days. And from the Bible, from the New Testament, it doesn't seem like those days were fulfilled per se, in any sort of way that I know of. But interestingly, in our own time, so if the spring feasts kind of correspond with the dispensation of the meridian of time, well, now we're in the last dispensation. And interestingly, it seems like the Feast of Trumpets, or Rosh Hashanah, was quote unquote fulfilled with Joseph Smith. And I've covered this a number of times on the channel. You have this article that was written. This is from the January 2000 Ensign, The Golden Plates and the Feast of Trumpets by Lenet, Hadley, Reed. And Lenet points out that Joseph Smith received the gold plates on Rosh Hashanah. Now, Rosh Hashanah, again, it has to do with a warning call. One of the primary features of Rosh Hashanah is the blowing of the shofar. It's meant to let you know, oh, this is where this is the 2-minute warning. You have 10 days to make sure everything's right in your life before we get to Yom Kippur. Today on Rosh Hashanah, your name is written in either the book of life or the book of death. And then there's some of you that still need to go one way or the other. Ideally get your name written in the book of life, and you have 10 more days to do it, the 10 days of awe. But by Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, it's sealed for that year. So there's a warning call. And it's perfect because, the Book of Mormon is the shofar of this dispensation. It's the main tool of the harvest right now during the last dispensation. So Joseph Smith received the gold plates on Rosh Hashanah, when Jews around the world were blowing the shofar and sounding the warning call as the Day of Atonement was approaching. So this is on BYU's website, Joseph Smith Chronology. You'll remember that he was supposed to meet with the angel Moroni on the same day each year until, and I think it's for 5 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So 5 years in a row. And as it turns out, when you use hebcal.com to see the Hebrew calendar, that very first visitation, it took place during the Feast of Tabernacles, specifically on Sukkot 3, the third day of the Feast of Tabernacles. The next year, they met on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. Later that day at sundown, it would have been Rosh Hashanah because that's when the Hebrew day or the Jewish day starts, is at sundown. So you could say that they met on Rosh Hashanah. And then the next year, they met on Yom Kippur, right? The 10th day of the month of Tishri, right? The 10 days of awe, Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Hebrew calendar, according to Jews. 1826, in that year, they did not meet on a Jewish holiday because you know that ours is a solar calendar, theirs is a lunar calendar, so it doesn't like match up every year. It kind of floats around. But then on that last visitation, the one in which Joseph Smith received the gold plates, it was on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, right here. It was a Saturday. So not only was it Rosh Hashanah, but it was also the Jewish Sabbath that day. And he received the gold plates on that day. So there's that, as well as several years later in 1836 in the Kirtland Temple on Pesach 2, which is first fruits. And in that year, Easter was also on the same day because they're not always on the same day. Like I said, the Jews and Christians, they calculate it differently, but it's essentially the same thing. Easter and first fruits is the same thing. So for example, in 2022, I have this spreadsheet here. In 2022, both first fruits and Easter on the Western calendar was on the 17th of April. But the next year, and also this year, 2024, they were not on the same day. First fruits is tomorrow, April 24th, but Easter on the Western Christian calendar was on the 31st of March. Okay. I have other things here as well. Just a quick explanation. Column D, I have this to track if in that year, Passover, the Passover week, Pesach, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, if it lined up the same way that it did during that last year of Christ's life, the last week, where Pesach 1 would have been on Saturday. So in 2022, it was. It lined up the same way that it did for that last week of Christ's life. Oh, geez. And then we're not going to see another lineup like that until 2029. And it just so happens that in 2029, that will be a year when first fruits and Easter are on the same day. So you get how that goes. Additionally, you have the Shemitah years. So in Judaism, they treat like years like days. And so there's a Sabbath of years called the Shemitah. And in 2022, everything lined up. First fruits, Easter on the same day. Pesach 1 was on Saturday, and it was a Shemitah year. So hopefully that makes sense how this works. I also have, Palm Sunday stuff here and other significant days like April 6th. So for this year, the only thing that really stood out to me is that General Conference started on April 6th, Christ's birthday. So, but anyway, back to this. So we're talking about the Kirtland Temple. So in that year, 1836, both Easter and first fruits were on the same day. Additionally, it was on Sunday. So first fruits, Sunday, and Easter all together the same day. And that's when Elijah appeared. Christ, Elijah, Elias, Moses. But this is something that Jews today are still expecting. And it turns out he didn't come on Passover. He didn't come on any other day other than first fruits. So as to highlight Christ's resurrection, right? That should be like a sign to the Jews that no, he was Messiah and he resurrected. And actually, the resurrection of Christ, that is the sign of Jonah. Christ said that the only sign that the Jews were going to be given was the sign of Jonah, which had reference to Jonah being swallowed by the whale, which was a foreshadowing of Christ and his death and then his resurrection. So Elijah came on a day that commemorates the sign of Jonah or the resurrection of Christ, right? Um, so let's see. I think there was something else I wanted to say about that. Oh yeah, there's one thing that people get wrong when it comes to, where is it? Here it is. When there's something that people get wrong when it comes to Elijah. People believe that during the Passover meal or seder that there's an empty chair for Elijah, and that's not true. There is an empty chair during another occasion. So this is on Jewish Virtual Library. It says the chair of Elijah. Here, I'll make this bigger. Is a special chair placed at the right of the sandak, or godfather, at the circumcision ceremony and left unoccupied. The chair is symbolically meant for Elijah, the prophet called the angel of the covenant. So that's when you have the empty chair. But during Passover, during the seder, it's not an empty chair. This is on kabod.org. They're like a Jewish outreach organization to try and get Jews to be religious and return to their roots and learn about Judaism. So it's a good website for us if you want to learn about Judaism. So why is Elijah the prophet invited to the seder? So he is invited to the seder, but is there an empty chair? No. At the conclusion of the seder's grace after meals, there is a universally accepted custom to pour a cup of wine, the cup of Elijah, open the front door of the home and recite several verses, mostly from Psalms, wherein we beseech God to pour his wrath upon our persecutors and oppressors. So there's not an empty chair on Passover. I think that's something that people get mixed up. The empty chair is for circumcision day, but for the seder, it's simply opening the door, pouring an extra glass of wine. And I've actually first learned that from Rabbi Gerfein. I'll actually be talking to him in like about a week or two. But he's the first one that pointed it out to me. And I think it's like one of those things that we just like, that we don't get right. It's a mistake that we perpetuate. Okay. So anyway, so Joseph Smith receives the gold plates on Rosh Hashanah, right? Elijah appears in the Kirtland Temple on first fruits. He doesn't show up during the Passover meal. He shows up during first fruits. So that's why I think there is reason to believe that we should still pay attention to these feast days. Now, Jessica was pointing out the Christian observance of Pentecost. I don't know that things would happen according to that calendar, because what I just pointed out goes according to the current Hebrew calendar, but who knows? So we can look at May 19th. That certainly could be a day or the couple days before. I don't know. So we could look at that, or we could look at the Hebrew calendar. So again, first fruits is going to be tomorrow. Maybe something will happen tomorrow. That's going to start the Omer count, which is going to culminate in the 50th day, or Shavuot 1, which will be on the 12th of June. So these are dates to pay attention to. Now, Jessica pointed out this talk by Elder Shayne M. Bowen of the 70, and it's called Miracles, Angels, and Priesthood Power. And I had done a video already talking about angels, because I felt like angels were really emphasized this general conference, and this is one of the talks. He says, many today say that miracles no longer exist, that angels are fictional, and that the heavens are closed. I testify that miracles have not ceased, angels are among us, and the heavens are truly open. Then later on, he says, President Russell M. Nelson has taught us to seek and expect miracles, and he references President Nelson's talk, The Power of Spiritual Momentum, which was his main talk of the April 2022 General Conference. And then he ends his talk saying, I witness that miracles have not ceased, angels are among us, and the heavens are open. And oh, how open they are. That was like one of the main themes this conference is believe in angels, believe in miracles. And it's probably because we're going to need them more than ever in the days and months, and hopefully not years, but possibly years ahead. Okay, so with that being said, thank you, Jessica, for the email. So let's pay attention to May 19th. Let's pay attention to June, whatever I just said, June 12th and 13th. especially in a year like this, things could happen. Now, in regards to Passover, there's some interesting things happening this year. On Israel 365 News, there's an article written by Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz, the guy that I interviewed about the red heifer. And it's called On Passover Eve, Netanyahu compares Hamas to Pharaoh for not letting hostages go. Now, I actually find this interesting because you might remember it was Christian Fire Poppy, Jen from Christian Fire Poppy. And if you like my channel and you haven't checked her out, you might want to subscribe to her. We think a lot alike and share a lot of the same ideas, so I'm sure you'd enjoy her content. I'll put the link for her channel in the description box below. But she had done a video called November 21st, 21-day challenge, Daniel 12:12, blessed is he that waiteth. And she was looking at the book of Daniel, and the book of Daniel is one of these places that you find a 3.5 year period. You find it a couple times actually, but one of the ones that's mentioned is 1,290 days. It talks about the daily sacrifice being taken away, which some people interpret that to be like to have not only reference to the temple back then, but the temples now. And so she points out that temples were closed because of the pandemic on March 26, 2020. And if you do that count, 1,290 days, it brings you to the day that the war started in Israel. And then if you count, there's another number that's mentioned, 1,335 days. That brings you to November 21st, and that was the day that, if I remember right, the first hostages were released. There's that part where it says, blessed is he that waiteth, and cometh to the 1,350 and 30 days, or whatever. Which I don't think that's coincidence. Now, I've talked to Jen about this. My opinion is that that wasn't necessarily strict fulfilled. I don't think that's what Daniel, the prophecy was specifically about, but we've talked about the fact that I think the Lord works in patterns, and there's multiple fulfillments, or there's fulfillments that point to future fulfillments, but it's some kind of thing. And it's too coincidental to ignore. So we have this unusual war that started. And by the way, it started 7 days after General Conference and 7 days before the Utah eclipse. So that's interesting. And then you have this from the book of Daniel, and it has to do with the hostages. So there really could be something to this. So now we're reading from this article, written on April 22nd. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a pre-Passover video address in Hebrew on Sunday night. Quote, on this night, 133 of our dear brothers and sisters are not around the seder table, and they are still held hostage by Hamas in hellish conditions. We have already freed 124 of our hostages, and we are committed to returning them all home, the living and the deceased alike. And why is this night not different? He said, intentionally misquoting the Passover Haggadah, and then continuing, that in every generation they rise up to destroy us, and the Holy One, blessed be he, saves us from them, he said, giving the correct answer. Netanyahu compared Hamas to Pharaoh, who refused to release the Israelites from bondage. Quote, as a result of this, it has only hardened its conditions for the release of our hostages. It is hardening its heart and refusing to let our people go. Therefore, we will strike it with additional painful blows, and this will happen soon. In the coming days, which as soon as I read that, I thought that was kind of interesting because it made me think about President Nelson in the October 2022 General Conference. This is the same talk where he called on us to be the people of the second coming. Earlier in the talk, he says this, but my dear brothers and sisters, so many wonderful things are ahead. In coming days, we will see the greatest manifestations of the Savior's power that the world has ever seen. Between now and the time he returns with power and great glory, and he cites Joseph Smith Matthew 136 that talks about the sign of the Son of Man. Between now and the time he returns, the sign of the Son of Man, He will bestow countless privileges, blessings, and miracles upon the faithful. And boy, has he ever. I've heard from a lot of you that have experienced miracles and blessings. I myself have been the beneficiary of that. One of mine was going to the Kirtland Temple for the eclipse because I didn't think that was going to be possible, neither financially nor because of parking in traffic. I didn't know if we were going to be able to get to the temple, but we did. And everything opened up in a very miraculous way. And one thing I don't think I've said on the channel, the money that we used to get the rental car and pay for gas and food and all that stuff was the same money that we were going to use to buy cows. So in a way, I sacrificed cows so that we could get to the Kirtland Temple, which I think is interesting. But anyway, this part of Netanyahu's address kind of just made me think about that. In the coming days, we will increase the military and diplomatic pressure on Hamas because this is the only way to free our hostages and achieve our victory. Therefore, we will strike it with additional painful blows, and this will happen soon. In the coming days, he says that again, we will increase the military and diplomatic pressure on Hamas because this is the only way to free our hostages and achieve our victory. Citizens of Israel, on the eve of Passover, when the people of Israel went forth from slavery to freedom, let us remember our fallen heroes and our wounded fighters. Thanks to whose sacrifice we are a free people. So you have this interesting thing going on. You know, we're in this war. This is the first Passover of this war. You know, it may be the only one. It depends on how long the war goes, but the war started in October. So this is the first Passover. You also have this going on. Kibbutz Be'eri survivors hold seder in Hostages Square, fiery protest at Prime Minister's home. So here they have like a mock like seder table. You know, it looks like there's like wine bottles there and stuff. The Jewish holiday of Passover began in Israel on Monday evening, with families around the country gathering for the festival Seder meal, held this year under the cloud of war, with Hamas and the 133 hostages still held by the Hamas terror group. While some marked the holiday with symbolic acts to commemorate the victims and the hostages, others chose to forego the traditional meal and protest outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home. Jews traditionally read through the Haggadah on Passover Eve, which recounts the story of the Israelites' freedom from slavery and exodus from Egypt. A telling made more poignant amid the continued captivity hostages. That's a typo there. More than 6 months since they were dragged off to Gaza during the October 7th massacre. Many Israelis and Jews around the world were encouraged to leave an empty chair at the table to symbolize the absence of the hostages, the 1,200 people killed in the terror onslaught, along with the more than 260 soldiers who have fallen since. Again, remember, we just read it. The chair is for when they do the circumcision ceremony, but for the Seder, it's an extra glass of wine and opening the door. But, you know, so don't get it confused, but that's interesting. And then there was this that happened today. Hezbollah fires 35 rockets as Passover starts in Israel. IDF strikes back. So I'm sure that was calculated. You know, the war started on a Jewish holiday. It wasn't one of the major holidays. What you have, in case you don't know, you have all these holidays, but they're divided into categories. So the way that Christians will typically depict it, including myself, I just kind of go along with what everyone understands. They'll portray it like there's 7 feast days. And that's kind of true. Like when we're talking about like major feast days, although according to Judaism, they don't like recognize first fruits as like a feast day or a holiday. It's something that you do. It's something that starts the Omer count that leads up to Shavuot. But if you go to this article from My Jewish Learning, it talks about the biblical holidays, including pilgrimage festivals, and you have Passover, Pentecost, the Feast of Tabernacles, Rosh Hashanah, and the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement. So these are like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are like the 5 main ones, right? And how's it go right here? Passover. Oh, and there's also the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which that makes reference to the fact that during Pesach, like you could say that Pesach, the entire thing is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because during this week or these 7 to 8 days, you're not supposed to have anything that has leaven, So, but the Jews, they don't necessarily count it the same way. I think this is more of like a Christian way of counting it. But so those are like the major ones: Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. And then you have like these other ones. And what I was making reference to is the fact that, so you just had this attack from Hezbollah. It wasn't anything like huge. It was 35 rockets on the beginning of Passover. But then the war started on what's like the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles. It's not like really part of it per se. It's like the day after, but it's called Simchat Torah. It's also known as, there's also like this additional thing, Shemini Atzeret. I'm not going to go into all that. And then you have other things like Hanukkah, Tisha B'Av, but those aren't part of these like biblical holidays as mentioned right here. So moving forward, the last thing I wanted to point out, I came across this interesting video. This is from Chris Hutchinson account on X. Hardline Israeli minister of the parliament or Knesset, Yitzhak Pindrus, says the third temple will be constructed soon at the site of Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied Jerusalem. These are Chris's words, not mine, and how he's describing it. He urged Jews to perform the Passover sacrifice the following Monday in anticipation of the arrival of the Messiah. And you can watch this here. I'm going to repost it to save it for you, so you can go to my X, you can watch it. There's a bunch of different accounts that have reposted this, but yeah, he seemed pretty serious, and there was an attempt. Now, my understanding is that this happens every year. There's always kind of like these extreme people that try and do a sacrifice on the Temple Mount, but people decided to take him up on his offer, or they were just acting alone. In times like in previous years, there have actually been like cash rewards offered to people that successfully do a sacrifice on the Temple Mount. But in this case, this is Times of Israel, 13 suspects arrested for trying to sacrifice goats on Temple Mount in biblical Passover ritual. 13 people have been detained near Jerusalem's Temple Mount with lambs and goats that they intended to sacrifice on a biblical Passover, in a biblical Passover ritual, the police say in a statement. In one instance, a goat was found hidden inside a baby carriage, while another suspect attempted to smuggle a goat onto the Flashpoint site in a reusable grocery bag, police say. So it seems pretty extreme. Poor goats. I'm sure the goats are fine now. They've been saved. But anyway, this is a time to watch. If anything happens, of course, I'll do a video, but it's basically just a heads up. We have Christian Pentecost, so look for that, May 19th. We have Pentecost on the Hebrew calendar. That's not going to be until June 12th, but right now, as we speak, we are now in this period of Pesach, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Passover week, whatever. And then Bikurim, or first fruits, is going to be tomorrow on the 24th. All right. So things could happen during these days, things related to the second coming, any number of things, maybe things that we don't even know yet. So just be aware. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.